guys, welcome to the Immortal build guide. This is a build guide for a support tanking Necromancer. This is my most recent build that has been a top tier hybrid for just about any content, including World v World. So let's just jump right in as a preface. Number one, this is a support tank heal hybrid build. So if you're looking to do big DPS, drop things fast, this is not for you. You can just move on. This build is designed to keep those that do high damage alive. Those glass cannons are not so glassy with you around, and to sustain a team. And it does that very well. This is also not a maxed build. It is a hybrid, so it can heal better and you can tank better, but we're trying to do a mix of both. And with the advent of Heart of Thorns, more difficult PvE content like raids and some of the newer maps, these hybrid type builds are more and more helpful, especially with some of the new stat combinations that are coming out. Secondly, all the data in this video has been both theoretically and empirically tested. That means that the number crunching, the actual math behind it, has all been done. I can show that to you. I have loads of Google spreadsheets about this, and then this build has also been shown in practice to be very, very effective for what it's meant to do. It's not very easy to play. It takes a lot of getting used to, but it's extremely strong for what it's meant to be. As for number three, in this preface, this build, I think I kind of already covered this, is all about sustaining a team and yourself. It is a support build. You won't be doing large numbers, but that does not mean you can't solo anything. This build can solo just about anything in the game. You just can't kill things quite as fast as a full Zerker build or a Viper build. Number four, the solo DPS on this build is enough. It is not huge, but it is not nothing. Number five, all skills and traits in this build have a purpose. Everything is here and placed for a reason. And I'll be going over all of those reasons, why we pick those, and some potentially other options you can use if you have a preference. Again, this build is a top tier hybrid build. I like to call it tier 3 because we're not focusing on DPS, we're focusing on support and backline help. So in order to do that, we need to create a perfect combination between being extremely tanky, therefore the Immortal, and being able to keep our group up, or our minions. I'm not going to cover any of the minor traits in these lines because you can't not choose them. So for our first major trait, we have Flesh of the Master. This one's extremely important because it grants you a lot of toughness. You can have as many as 12 minions up at a time, which is 240 toughness if you're in a large PvE event. So the more you can keep your minions up, the harder you will be to kill. They're also the source of our DPS in this build. With a lot of vulnerability stacking, you can keep about 3,500 DPS, that's damage per second, just with minions. That's half of a Zerker build, which is really good considering we're not focusing on power or condition damage. Next, we have Necromantic Corruption. This is great. This is really important because it keeps conditions off of us. While we will be using staff, and staff number 4 does transfer conditions, this is extra great because it helps our minions do higher damage, and it transfers conditions to our enemies. While we, as you know, the Immortal, we're not going to be focusing on condition damage, keeping those conditions off you is extremely important. That's less damage on you and more time for you to do your job. Lastly, we have Corruptor's Fervor. Originally, I did Death Nova, but since they made the Jagged Horrors timed, they only last 15 seconds, well 30 seconds now, whether you heal them or not. You can only have 2 up at a time, which I don't like. So you can get a lot more toughness out of Corruptor's Fervor. It can stack 10 times and gives you 30 toughness every single time you add any condition. That includes the conditions your minions do. So all that cripple your minions do, blind, bleed, any kind of condition your minions do will grant you Corruptor's Fervor. So you don't even have to do anything and you can keep 10 stacks. And that's another 300 toughness for nothing. And it decreases your incoming condition damage, which protection doesn't even do. So it's a great way to go. Minus 20% condition damage pretty much all the time. So moving on, we're going to be going to our healing trait, our blood magic line. Again, I'm not going to be covering the minor traits, but on these major traits, I've chosen to go ahead and do the lesser signet of vampirism called Blood Bond. While this one has a long cooldown, it's fairly good in groups. On your own, it doesn't do a lot because minions can't take the vampiric mark and heal themselves. Only other players can. But again, our focus here is to help other players and be a support. And this is a great one. Every time they strike while that vampiric mark is up, it grants them 825 health, as you can see on here, every second. Next is Life from Death. When you're in a team, Life from Death is what you want to be running with. Every time you exit Shroud, as you can see, you'll be doing almost 3,000 healing to 5 people around you. That's incredible. It's for glass cannon builds, it heals quite a bit, and your Shroud recharges every 10 seconds, 9 seconds, I guess, and then it will heal them up. So don't be afraid to spam Shroud, even if your skills aren't off cooldown. And lastly, is probably our most powerful heal, maybe even the most powerful direct heal in the entire game. I'm not sure, but it's called Transfusion. This skill is incredible. This is kind of the backbone of this build. What it does is when you use your Shroud skill 4, it pulses 9 times and heals enemies every single time or allies every single time it pulses. So as you can see here, I'm doing 736 healing, and then that's 9 times. With some of our equipment, we can get that well above 10,000 health every time we use Transfusion. And that's going to 5 allies around you within 600 meters. That's huge, and it makes a big difference. When playing in raids, you can see your entire raid, all their health just kind of raised. So in a raid or in a party or dungeon, when you're fighting a difficult boss and multiple players go down, you can use Transfusion away from the enemy and teleport them to you. This allows them to get out of the area of damage that's being done, and for you to be able to res them or heal them instantly that way. And lastly, we've got Reaper. This build relies heavily on Reaper because Reaper augments all of our other traits to the point where it makes this entire thing viable. First off is Augury of Death. This is to help us keep our, I guess I have my wrong skill up here. Let's change this to Rise. Rise will give you up to 5 minions, 6 even, I think. Potential minions instantly, and Augury of Death will reduce the cooldown of that, which means more minions for us, more toughness for us, and also more DPS for us. Since we do use minions to do damage, Rise makes a huge difference and can keep us up at 12 stacks of minions all the time. Secondly, Chilling Victory. This one is probably the least useful trait in this build, but we're not really using it for the might here. When we strike a chilled foe, we get might and life force. What we really want here is the life force. Every second, we can gain 1% life force with striking a chilled enemy. Honestly, stacking 25 stacks of might on this build isn't going to change a lot. You still do pretty much nothing. But gaining that life force is really important because when we're in Reaper Shroud, that's when we're healing the most. And lastly, we have Reaper's Onslaught. This trait is going to be used to decrease, again, our Shroud skill number 4. This is where we heal the most, and this is where we want to be if we want to drop big heals. While you're in Shroud, every time you kill an enemy, it drops the recharge of all of your skills by 5 seconds. That's constantly refreshing your skills and constantly giving you more time to drop Transfusion in an area effect. This skill is entirely used for Transfusion here. So the more we can cool down, the better we'll do. Now for skills, we're going to first talk about our utility skills. I personally, for our heal, I choose Summon Blood Fiend. This is not the only healing skill you can go for. Another really great option is Well of Blood. This is a great way to heal your allies. It's not as potent as Transfusion, or really even as Life from Death. But when using Well of Blood, you can stay out of the way and help your allies at the same time. The reason I choose Blood Fiend is because the passive heal on Blood Fiend is huge. Over time, Blood Fiend will heal you more than any other healing skill in the game, especially if you have that minion lifesteal up and you have a lot of healing power stacked. Every time this minion attacks, it heals me for almost 1,000 HP. Actually, it is doing 1,000 HP, which is a lot, and it's important for me, the Immortal, to stay alive. Therefore, I use Summon Blood Fiend. Gives more toughness and keeps you very well healed. The next skill is Summon Bone Minions. The reason I picked this one is simply because there's 2 minions. That's twice the amount of toughness from our death magic line. The minions can be detonated for really high spike damage and used for combo finisher blast. The next one here is the Shadow Fiend. This one I've kind of gone back and forth on a lot, but ultimately I think this is the best minion for this build, simply because of the 10% life force you gain from using Haunt. When this minion teleports forward and blinds someone, it grants you 10% life force, which again, that Reaper Shroud is where we want to be when dropping large heals. Next one is Rise. Rise gives us the most number of minions in one skill. It really is one of those things that makes this build so viable. Every time you hit something, it reduces the recharge of the skill, and you can summon up to 6 minions instantly, giving you, well, what is that, 120 toughness off of one skill. It's pretty good. Lastly is Summoned Flesh Golem. The Flesh Golem has the most DPS out of any minion, and it has that cripple. Cripple and charge. When you knock something down, it gives your minions more time to melee and get in range. It also gives them more time to strike when the enemy is constantly being crippled using that basic attack. Other variations you can use. The Bone Fiend is great because it allows you to keep your enemies crippled and immobilized more often. The downside with the Bone Fiend is simply that it doesn't do quite as much damage as the Shadow Fiend, but it does do range damage and immobilize, which is very useful, especially if you can't keep your enemies, locked down or holding still. Another option, obviously, is that Flesh Worm. The Flesh Worm has the highest DPS, aside from the Golem, of course, of any minion. In PvE, PvP, this is extremely useful because it allows you to teleport when you're locked down, breaks a stun, and is a blast finisher. When you do that necrotic traversal and teleport to your Flesh Worm and explode it, it also gives you that 10% life force, just like the Shadow Fiend is. Granted, the cooldown is much longer and destroys your minion, which is also costing you toughness and DPS. So for PvE, I don't generally use this because PvE is more liquid and constantly moving. I want a minion that isn't rooted like the Flesh Worm is. So I personally choose Shadow Fiend. This is flexible. Feel free to play with your minions. Whatever you enjoy most, honestly, the minions are there to make you tough. It doesn't really matter which minions you pick. I would recommend keeping with Rise just because of the number of minions that it allows you to summon at once. But all the other minions, feel free to play with. Another option, even on your elite skill, is Lich Form. When you use Lich Form, there is a skill that summons I think it's 5 Jagged Horrors at once, which is great because that's even more minions. The only downside here, it's got a 3-minute recharge time. That's 180 seconds on that Lich Form, so you won't have those Jagged Horrors up very often. But if you really need the tankiness, you can always pop Lich Form. You just won't do much damage again because we're not doing a damage build. So I personally choose that Flesh Golem. So again, utility skills down here. These are flexible, but you want to stick with minions as much as you can because that will augment your toughness and it will also augment your damage. Alright, now for our weapon skills, I'm going to go ahead and start with the number one weapon I would recommend using for this build is Staff. Staff's first attack is extremely convenient because every time you hit something, it regenerates your life force 4%, and it pierces. So if you're aiming at a target and there's multiple targets between you and your ultimate target, it will grant you 4% life force for every target you hit, up to 5. So you can get 20% life force in one cast of your number 1. If you just line yourself up correctly, it's very efficient for regenerating your life force. Number 2 is Mark of Blood. This skill is one of the backbones to this build again, just like that trait Transfusion. This is going to grant a lot of regeneration with a lot of concentration stacked up, which increases your boon duration. Mark of Blood can potentially cast a 10-second regen every time you drop it, and it only has a I guess it's about 5-second cooldown. So with this, and with in combination of the Mark of Blood dodging minor trait, we didn't cover that, but when you dodge, you leave a Mark of Blood. It's not quite as long. The duration isn't as long as your staff version, but it's another great way to stack regeneration on another 5 targets when this isn't even on, if you don't have it, or if you're swapped to your off weapon. So this, that one skill right there will regenerate about 3,000 health for 5 allies. I can't over exaggerate how important regeneration is and how keeping it up makes a huge difference. The reason this is kind of ignored a lot is because it's a slow heal over time. It's not the big numbers that we talked about with transfusion or with minions, but with regeneration you can do a lot of healing over time. So if there's a 5-minute boss battle, your regeneration is going to be doing more healing than any of your skills combined. If you can keep it up. And with concentration and Mark of Blood, it's easy to keep it up for a party of 5. Next is Chilblains. This is a great skill because it slows down your enemies for your minions to do more beneficial damage. When your enemies are slowed, your minions can do more efficient damage, especially the melee minions. So they can stay in melee range and continue to drop the DPS that they do. Again, this isn't a DPS build, but the more DPS we can squeeze out of our minions, the better. This also creates a poison field, which is a great opportunity to create weakness if you blow up your bone minions, or you use your next skill, Putrid Mark. You can do an AoE weakness effect. Weakness, it makes it so that half of their attacks do half damage. So again, that's just another great condition that you can create, that you can add to increase your party's survivability, is that weakness. Number 4, Putrid Mark. This is a great way to keep yourself alive, especially when your minions aren't transferring enough conditions off of you. Don't just spam this every time it pops up. Hold on to it, and when a lot of conditions drop on you, then use it, and it will keep you alive. Number 5, our Reaper's Mark. This skill is a great CC. I just use it to help break things. It's also good in PvP for keeping enemies off of you, unless of course they have ways of negating your fear, which is really common in PvP. But in PvE, it's extremely useful to keep your minions and your party members from being attacked, even if it is for just a moment. Again, I have a trait that causes fear to chill. And that chill is just like number 3, Chilblains. Makes it so your minions do a little more damage because your targets are slowed. Now, my choice of off weapon is Axe and Focus, but this isn't what you choose for your second weapon set. Isn't as important as having Staff. I personally choose Axe and Focus because of the vulnerability stacking. When you're playing solo, which I do a lot, having 25 stacks of vulnerability on your enemies helps with your minions' damage a lot, because you have no way of increasing your minions' damage in this game. Minions do the same amount of damage whether you have max power or no power at all, or condition damage. Doesn't really make a difference. So by creating 25 stacks of vulnerability, you increase you and your minions' damage by 25% by debuffing the enemy instead, which is why I choose Axe and Focus. Also, Axe has a really fast main attack, which is nice for some sigils that have procs. Also, Unholy Feast, and just like I talked about before, when you slow your enemies in PvE or PvP, it increases the opportunity your minions have to do damage. Unholy Feast does cripple for 5 seconds on 5 targets around you, and it converts boons to conditions. This is extremely useful. This is one of my favorite skills. If you cripple a bunch of enemies, you can your minions will do better damage. Now, if you choose to do Dagger, you can immobilize an enemy for 3 seconds and convert boons to conditions. This is a great way to go, especially in PvP if you're doing one-on-one fights. But the immobilize is only for 3 seconds, as opposed to a 5-second cripple to 5 enemies. I tend to like taking on whole rooms at a time and acting sort of like as a bunker. I don't do a lot of one-on-one, but both of those are great skills. As for focus, we'll move over there. I choose focus again because 1, the regeneration. As I said before, regeneration is great. Keep it up as much as you can. And 2, that vulnerability increases the opportunity for my minions to do max amount of damage. And if you are close to your enemy and you use Reaper's Touch, it does quite a bit of damage because it bounces 4 times. And lastly, here on focus, Spinal Shivers. Again, chilled. Slows your enemy so that those minions have a better chance of doing damage, and again removes those boons. Boons are nasty, especially in some of the new PvE content. There's a lot more boon stacking. You'll see just trash mobs with 25 stacks of might. That's not okay. As a support player, you can get rid of those stacks of might or their stable or their protection or anything using Spinal Shivers, Unholy Feast, or even Dark Pact. I don't choose Dagger offhand. It's not a bad one. I mean, none of them are really bad. I only recommend keeping with staff. But really, it's up to you what you enjoy the most. Deathly Swarm does create blindness, which keeps enemies from being able to land attacks, and it transfers conditions over. Personally, I find that number 4 on staff and transferring conditions from Necromantic Corruption is plenty for me. I don't need any more than that. I've never needed more than that, more condition cleanse than that. So yeah, okay, Enfeebling Blood. This is a great attack because in AoE it can cause weakness. I've never had a problem with keeping weakness up just by using combo fields, so I don't need it quite as much. And that bleeding is kind of useless with our build since we don't have any condition damage. Is Greatsword. Greatsword does a lot of damage, and since we're not focusing on damage, it's not particularly helpful, but it does do some regeneration. Gravedigger can be used if you swap out the Soul Eater trait and use Gravedigger. It's possible to heal yourself quite a bit, especially if you have high healing power like we do in this build. Death Spiral allows you to, again, recharge your life force and inflict a lot of vulnerability for your minions to do maximum damage. Nightfall is great with the blindness and boon to condition conversion, but it is in an area and in PvP and in a lot of PvE, your enemies will just walk out of it unless you can keep them in with that Grasping Darkness. So whatever weapon swap you choose, I would recommend keeping staff, and then whatever you enjoy the most, go for it, because honestly, just about any of these weapon swaps work for you. I highly recommend having something with a lot of boon to condition conversion or boon removal, just because that's the only thing that this build doesn't have a lot of unless you get it out of your weapons. I would stay away from Scepter in this build because Scepter is so focused on causing condition damage. There's not a lot of boon to condition or boon removal of any kind. You do need that in this build, and stacking Torment, Bleeding, and Poison really doesn't help a whole lot. Stick with I would do main hand Axe and offhand Dagger or Focus, and I would stay away from Mortarhorn. Other than that, Greatsword is excellent, Dagger is excellent, Axe is excellent. Just stick with what you like, and you're gonna just live in Death Shroud as much as you can to do that healing. All right, Chapter 3. Let's talk about our equipment. All of your equipment, at least should be something with toughness and healing power. There's a number of different attribute combinations that you can get toughness and healing power off of. I personally choose Minstrels. Minstrels is this combination. It's the major traits are toughness and healing power, and then the minor ones are vitality and concentration. I went ahead and did everything Minstrels, even my weapons. I prefer Minstrels because that concentration allows you to get a lot of boon duration increased. This is important because right here on our Mark of Blood, you can have almost, well, it's just above 9 seconds of regen every time you drop Mark of Blood, and it's only a 4-second, 5-second recharge. So keeping perma regen up, that drops a lot of health per second, is extremely useful. For trinkets I use the same exact stat combination. We're going to be using Minstrels all the way through, that toughness, healing power, vitality, and concentration. Vitality isn't an absolute must in this build, though toughness is. I like having a little bit of vitality because it improves how much Death Shroud or Life Force pool I can use and utilize to keep my party members alive. As for underwater weapons, exactly the same thing. Still, Minstrels, my personal preference. Now for runes and sigils. The runes I pick is Superior Rune of Monk. The monk runes come from Ascalonian Catacombs. You have to farm Ascalonian Catacombs to buy these. But the great thing about these runes is it increases your boon duration and it increases your outgoing healing effectiveness by 10%. This is a significant difference, especially when you use sigils that increase your outgoing healing effectiveness also. You can get up to 20% increased outgoing healing effectiveness just off of the runes and sigils. Also, number 4 on this rune, when you are struck, you have a chance to heal a small amount. I did the math on this, and it's actually significant. Every 15 seconds, you just randomly heal about 6k, 6,000 health points, just randomly. This is also scaling off of your healing power, and with about 1,500 healing power, you'll be getting about 5k heal, unless they've changed it again. That one keeps getting swapped without being put in any notes, which is very obnoxious, but I'll let you know if it swaps if I can. I choose to use the Sigil of Life. The other option to use is Sigil of Benevolence. Every time you kill an enemy, you get a stack of healing. So you can get up to 250 more healing power just by stacking that rune, or that sigil. The other sigil to use is Benevolence. This increases your healing, outgoing healing by a percentage. I have another video about what these runes are and how they're different, but suffice it to say that superior rune or superior sigil of Benevolence is a lot stronger than the sigil of Life. However, the Sigil of Benevolence will not heal you. It doesn't affect any of the heals going to you, only outward to your allies or to your minions. And I found that even though I do enjoy doing more healing, I think that Sigil of Life is a good combination because we're trying to tank and heal at the same time. And Sigil of Life covers both of those bases for us, rather than Sigil of Benevolence, which is only purely support. It won't help you tank any. The other sigil I choose for my weapons is a Sigil of Frailty. This is a very inexpensive sigil, but for this particular build it's very good because you can keep that vulnerability stack up. The great thing about this is when you're using it on staff, you can apply vulnerability in an AoE with it. So if you drop the Mark of Blood and you hit 5 targets with it, every single target has a chance to get vulnerability and then have that go on a 2-second cooldown. So it's possible to put 5 stacks of vulnerability over 5 enemies every 2 seconds with that skill, though it is a random chance. So that's why I choose the Sigil of Frailty. I also put the Sigil of Frailty on my axe because since it already does so much vulnerability, it's nice to get to that max 25 stacks of vulnerability as quickly as possible. And that helps us do that really well, especially with axes, quick striking. And for the fast forward from a focus, I go ahead and use the Sigil of Transference. That gives us an additional 10% healing effectiveness increase. So when I want to do really big heals, I swap to my axe and focus, drop into Death Shroud, and then use that Death Shroud number 4 for the transference, the transfusion. to get an extra 10% boost on my healing. In combination with Sigil of Life max stacks and the Sigil of Transference, I've seen numbers such as 1300 health just in burst, and then when you leave Shroud, you can do another 5k in an AOE. That's not even including some of the regen we can do off of Mark of Blood. With this all in combination, it makes you practically immortal to any kind of PvE content, and helps your team or your raid stay alive much longer. I haven't covered all of the ways that you can rotate through this build, but when you play with it, you'll find that there's a lot of ways to maximize how you heal, when you heal, and when's the best time to do it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up in game at Nexus, Nexace. If you have any critiques or changes you want to point out, feel free to comment. But to be completely honest, I'll probably just ignore you anyway because I hate keeping up with comments.